So we're, again, just highlight the problem is the growing population of this world and the services it takes to meet it. And our real issue is since 1895, our temperature is increasing, and so is our precipitation. So how does agriculture get impacted? Well, first of all, we have this increase of 5 inches of rainfall here in northern Indiana. Southern Indiana is more devastated because they already had more rainfall than us, and now they're getting an additional 7 inches to 6 to 7 inches. So they're going to see more flooding than we will here in northern Indiana. So what's happening in agriculture currently with reduced tillage? We're ninth in the country and changing compared to the 2012 and 2017 ag census. So we have 30% more reduced tillage, which we need to meet, which means we have a minimum of 15% cover of our soils after we're done tilling before planting the crop. No-till, it's Indiana, we're doing good. We're 4.9 million acres, but we actually decreased since the 2012 ag census. So we're kind of going backwards. As a nation though, tillage by acres, no-till has increased nationwide. Reduced tillage is increasing and intense tillage is decreasing. And that's reflected again in total the number of farms, million of acres. So more farmers are maintaining no-till, and reduced tillage is going up, and intensive tillage is going down. Number of factors for that. One is just the cost of doing intense tillage. It's costing you time and money and energy costs to do the intense tillage. So we can more timely plant our crop if we do reduce tillage, because we can cover more acres quicker and leave some cover to protect the soil. So here in Indiana, and we're thinking tillage here, the less tillage we do, more likely we're maintaining more of our soil in place and increasing over time a little increase in carbon in our soil by not having that erosion of the topsoil where the higher percent organic matter exists. So looking at conservation tillage since 1990 to 2019, we can see that corn is looking at 30% residue cover after planting. We're doing maintaining it for corn and actually increasing it for soybeans. And conservation tillage percent wise kind of reflects on a percent wise. We can see the percent has significantly increased initially for soybeans, but kind of dropped back recently. And for corn, it's kind of maintained itself since 1993. The handout I gave you, Marion, kind of shows the state of Indiana, and we're looking at conservation tillage. Light color means you do less of it. So this handout here, we can see Marshall County is not getting an award for in the comparisons to other counties in the state of Indiana on conservation tillage. So that lighter color means we're not as strong in this area as other counties are. So we can kind of help the situation here in Marshall County if we do more tillage. And then what they're showing in the other chart since 1990 is more specific data that I did not take the time to put into the PowerPoint presentation. So no-till, we tend to think of that as helping to build carbon storage in our soils by leaving our residue there to break down more slowly, protecting the soil better by maintaining a cover greater than 30%, so that we're not having surface soil erosion by having that protective layer of residue. And you can see that when we're looking at no-till acreage, it's stayed about the same since 1993 for corn, but it's trended upwards for soybeans. And as percent of acreage farmed, again, soybeans is a higher percent than corn right now, but we got up to a higher level, 70% no-till percentage, and we kind of backed off. And what I don't understand is why we till soybean residue so much greater than corn residue. You know, so when we're planting the corn crop, we tend to do more tillage, preparing that soil for that corn seed than we do for soybeans. So I would think we would be ahead if we did till soybean residue as much as what we do. And the issue of soybean residue is kind of how you harvest it. If you have a big swath behind the combine, it's going to be harder to plant the corn crop. So spreading the residue evenly is an important step to get that under control. Looking at no-till, how does Marshall County fare? Well, we're doing a little bit better than we did on the conservation tillage. So we have a higher percent and doing a little bit better job in this area compared to like St. Joseph County to the north of us. So we're doing more no-till, so that's good news for our farmers.
This says no tillage yet is collected from Marion County. Marion County don't even have farmland, does it?
Yeah.
It's all.
There's still some farm ground in Marion County, but you don't want to be the farmer farming it because getting equipment in and out of fields and it's rapidly becoming less. So, you know, and the other, you know, so the counties around Marion County and Marion County are all losing farm acreage as development expands out into the, what they call it, the circle counties or whatever around Marion County, because Hamilton County, they keep gobbling up land and paying a lot of money per acre. So that makes agriculture use not a profitable use of the ground. You can sell it for development at much higher prices. And then Hendricks County, same thing to the west of Marion County is really growing in an urban way.
Yeah, because they went down to the State Master Gardeners class or conference. Like,
Mm-hmm.
218.
Unlike Hancock County, it's the half closest to Marion County is more urban minded, and the half that's more on the east side of the county tends to still be more agriculture. But it's kind of like northern Indiana. Eventually, we're all going to be urbanized as South Bend, Chicago, and all these urban centers continue to grow. So hopefully not in my lifetime, but you know, the urban growth is occurring. The last census data shows that people are moving back to urban areas and less people live in rural areas. So
my economics teacher told me, told us that they want to see Chicago move this way, and it sure has. Especially around Valpo and it wasn't grown up like that years ago.
Oh, tall tree that the gentleman that started it wanted to have a bit of ground to remind people what it was like before it was urbanized. Was his goal for that property. So it's happening, and we can see the rural development of housing that is really working in the urban areas and just don't want to live in the urban areas.
Well,
so that
when stop in the Mishawaka house, built up in the Granger.
Wow.
Now it's
when I was a kid, I can remember you drive from Elkhart, Mishawaka, and the road that 20 or whatever is all rural. I mean, but now you drive from Elkhart to Mishawaka and it's all along that road I used to take, not the main highway, but the road we took, it's all built up now. But you're losing all that rural aspect in between the cities as they start growing together. You know, so that's a major concern. That's why Marion's not counted. There's not enough to have an impact, so they're not reporting it. And this is from Tillage Transects. So people actually drive all the counties and record what type of tillage is done, and also, you know, what's happening with cover crops, you know, because really cover crops is what's adding organic matter back to the soils versus the tillage system, the no-till. We'll talk about that here in just a second, but it can help build, sequester some carbon down in the soil, organic matter wise. But having the cover crop, it's actually enhancing it by having more root growth in the soil and more roots dying in the soil. And then the nutrients that are placed on top of the soil to help build the soil and help get that residue down. Because when we're talking about cover crops, when you're talking about grasses, you got the fibrous root system that can grow down deep into the soil, depending on the type of forage you're growing. And then we have, with broadleaves, we get tap roots that go into the soil, making large channels. And, you know, so that's good for the soil structure. Have those roots in the soil, then as they die, leave behind organic matter. Earthworms can help too, because they'll take residue on top and take it down in the soil and create channels for the soils to drain, so that you are building up the soil organic matter while improving drainage naturally through a worm population. So carbon sequestering is basically we're trying to recapture the carbon that's up in the atmosphere as we grow plants, so into the soil and plant communities that will leave deposited. This has already happened naturally. The Great Plains did it, and we had centuries of grass growing in the Great Plains. It built up feet of highly enriched topsoil with organic matter. So if we can do some restoring the soils in current farmed land, we can reintroduce 10 to 15% of the annual carbon emissions Americans create. The native grasslands and restoring the drained wetlands would reduce another 20%. So we used to have wetlands that stored a lot of organic matter because it didn't decompose because it was an anaerobic environment. Remember from your soils class, semester gardeners, as you go north, we have more organic matter in the soil as compared to going south, because as we go north, we have a cooler period in the winter time that's going to keep from breaking down the organic matter. And you go to Atlanta, they have a short winter and the soils stay warmer, so the organic matter keeps in that carbon cycle and being utilized and released by microorganisms. So as we go north, we have naturally more carbon sequestering, and that's what happens in the wetlands. They used to do that for us, even in Florida. All that organic matter was stored in those wetlands as it is today. But as we drain those wetlands to expand where people live, then that all is released. So looking at no-till, the impact, this is a research done where they did 20 years of no-till to see where did the soil organic matter carbon really start building up. It's based upon the climate and how dry or moist the site was. So for loamy, silty clay in a dry, cool climate, it wasn't very deep in the soil, and you're increasing significantly the soil organic carbon. But what they found in sandy soils throughout is that it's deeper down in the soil before it really started significantly increasing soil organic matter. In the cool, moist, loamy silt loam clay is 10 centimeters down. And remember, a centimeter is 10 dimes together is 1 centimeter. So if you stack them together, physically think about if you're not used to the English system, it's a centimeter. But then when we look at warmer soils, because that upper soil is staying biologically active longer, the accumulation occurred deeper in the soil for all soil types. In fact, a comment they made was in this research, and this was kind of culmination of many research projects on this subject matter, pulling out the highlights to make those statements earlier. But, so no-till will help with no-till management has benefits of sustaining the management of the soil. So we're protecting the soil, so we're not having soil erosion, improving soil structure, because by allowing that organic matter to stay put, we're going to have better soil properties, better water infiltration. And then carbon storage is a bit of a question mark because it depends on where that soil is, on how much carbon sequestering just no-till will do. In the northern climates, I'll tend to do more than in the southern climates, just like we talked about in Master Gardener's soil class. So it kind of depends on where you're farming no-till, on how much impact you're going to have on sequestering carbon in the soil, building the organic carbon percentage up significantly. But then carbon storage makes a big impact. So visible difference in the same soil at 1% carbon looks like it's a well aerated soil because it's brightly colored compared to a 5% organic matter. So we are actually changing the soil properties here by having that increased organic matter in it. We already talked about that. You've heard that in our soils class we had in Master Gardeners. So that's also sequestering some carbon for us. What is growing on the landscape will impact what the soil properties are and how much carbon is stored in that soil. So having a pasture that's managed to be, allowed to grow tall, grazed down, but not overgrazed, will tend to build the soil organic matter, and you'll get diversity of species within that organic matter. So you have tap roots of forbs that are going to go deeper and create channels for water to go in, and the finer roots of grasses that are going to build the organic matter closer to the soil surface, depending on if it's prairie species, and we'll show that later. I don't really see much difference, I'll be honest, because I compare that to the same soil by my house as a soybean field that they use some reduced tillage because you can see residue on top, but it's definitely not like no-till, and they don't use cover crops typically, so they got some good corn residue on top because last year was in corn production. So I'll do a test comparing the two soils. So visually, they actually look pretty similar. So I won't bother passing them around. But the other point is, depending on what you have, this is a Houghton muck and this is a Chelsea sand, just the natural soil properties can determine how much organic matter it holds as well. So this soil used to be a swamp and we drained it, which probably isn't so great for the carbon storage they had before we drained it, if we're looking at carbon sequestering. So, so the real impact is the type of plants growing throughout the year on a given site. And we have a good tool the Midwest Cover Crop Council, which you pull it up and you just put your state and county, so then they know your climate. And then you pick what you want for the cover crop to do. I put down soil builder and nitrogen scavenger, but it could be for grazing. So then you'd enhance, what you have to have a short grazing season. But there's actually 9 categories to pick from for your goals for your cover crop. And then the current crop, I put down corn silage, so that I planted it back in May, and I've already harvested it here in August. And then it takes this data, you tell it drainage too, so it knows if it's a wet site. And if it will flood, I said up to 7 days is the most it'll be flooded. And then it gives you options to plant, in this case, winter sorrel, rye, ryegrass, and oats, and even sweet clover. So I wanted a soil builder, so the sweet clover would work. Some of these other mixes, like pearl millet, is more of a summer mix, so it's not an option for when I want to grow a cover crop. So it's not given to me, and it tells you when is the optimum time to plant it as a cover crop. So it's a good tool. So if you're going to use a cover crop, it can be used by homeowners too, because it tells you what you can grow and what the time window you're giving it to grow. And that's part of the challenge with cover crops with corn. When you're looking at the sheet that's talking about cover crops, soybeans, one reason it's higher than corn is the window to plant for soybeans can be managed easier than for corn. We want our corn to be full season. Then we have an overview of global carbon budget and microbial contributing. So we're looking at, terrestrial carbon cycle. The values and brackets represent exchange of carbon between land and atmosphere per year. Green numbers are the natural fluxes. Red numbers are the human contribution. White numbers indicate stored. Gray boxes represent the ecosystems services provided by the carbon cycling. Red arrows represents processes. So let's look at our larger scale. So we're talking about the water storage and transmission here of the soil erosion, which can move stuff off-site, water filtration and pollution actuation. So soil is our main cleanser of our water. We know that with people that use septic systems. That's the whole idea behind septic systems, is the soil will clean the pathogens before it reaches our groundwater. So natural system, we have photosynthesis that's taking carbon out of the air. So, so we're talking about bogs. There's 2 things happen. It's carbon preservation because it's not breaking down rapidly. So we're storing some carbon, but as it is broken down, methane's released out of our bogs, producing methane that's going up into the air, which will break down in 12 years into carbon dioxide. Hopefully it gets used more productively down the road in our carbon cycling. So we have a lot of things happening. We kind of talked about that before with another carbon cycling post. But, in the case of humans emissions, that's a concern because a lot of times our emissions is not part of a carbon cycle. So there's not something that's releasing it like a bog that's also storing it. So the bog is trapping new stuff that goes into it, store it, but it does release some. We release it and we don't cycle it ourselves usually. A great tool that we can use is trees. And what's nice to see that trees that are better trees tend to be better jobs at carbon storage. So this is showing you as the younger trees is not doing much for it. As the trees increase in size, they're significantly storing more carbon in pounds. And the hope then is that these trees are harvested and used for furniture and stuff, so it's not being recycled right back into the being released as a waste. So we got the tree roots that's doing a good job of storing some 13% of the carbon. The trunk and branches is another 40%. It's building some soil organic matter by being present. The leaves is 1%, and then they fall off and they create the A layer, the forest soil, which tends to be thin because when the leaves fall on the soil surface, they tend to be have the carbon, the organic matter released by the microorganisms living in the soil, so it gets cycled, and some of the carbon will be released. So a tree is a good way that can help store some carbon and take some out of our atmosphere. So the thought now is some tree facts. Indiana has 4.5 million acres of forest land, 19.4% forested. We used to be, remember, 85% forested before people came here. But we're up from where we were, because we were lower than that. 2 billion trees, or 340 trees for each Indiana resident. So that's good news. Private land ownership owns 85% of Indiana forests. So our current tree growth is 3.3 times greater than tree harvested, which is reflected in this number here. So I used to quote 17%. So we've grown from 17 to 19.4%. So our forested area is growing. I won't comment. We have the state tree, the yellow poplar, which actually the Reese Theater is built out of yellow poplar. Did you know that? Back in the 30s and 40s, that's what prime tree they were using for construction. The largest tree in Indiana is a sycamore in Johnson County. It's 120 feet tall. Wow. I don't think I want to stand by that tree.
No, when it's blowing, not when it's blowing over.
So we did have, DNR does put out a document telling you where the largest trees of each species are located in the state of Indiana. So if you're curious, you can go look that up. Where'd you get this from, Christina?
The link's down below, but it's from the USDA.
Okay. Our DNR used to maintain the tallest tree in the state of Indiana list.
I need to look that up. That sounds pretty
Because
cool.
there's some in northern Indiana and there's several in southern Indiana because it tends to be more forested down there. So a fast growing tree stores the most carbon during its first decade. So that's an advantage. Long lived trees can keep carbon storage for generations. Just think of the old council oak that was there for centuries. Large leaves and wide crowns enable maximum photosynthesis. So a honeysuckle probably doesn't do as good of a job as carbon storage initially because it tends to let light through. So it's not capturing as much sunlight. So it's creating the carbohydrates that's trapping the carbon in its system that gets passed through the plant. So some trees will do a better job, as the former slide already showed, at capturing and storing carbon. Native species for your soils, that's to support local wildlife. We do have some cultivars that have been created that are not invasive cultivars. Crosses, they do a good job as well, which is a cross of native species. So, Marion, what's the worst tree to plant in your yard? That's invasive.
Mulberry and box elder.
Well, the ones I was thinking about, the ornamental pear trees, because they harvest those fruits and they take them elsewhere and gets seeded. Disease resistant cultivars are starting to become more of a problem. We'll do a better job with greenhouse gas. We'll do better without greenhouse gas producing fertilizers and equipment. So fortunately, our walnut trees are still in that category thanks to the thousand canker disease not being a concern here in Indiana. Because we don't have a droughty environment. If we did, it would be.
About walnuts on the ground. Is that because of the storms we've had, or is that because they're just starting to drop all of a sudden? Sort of early.
Well, my fruit's dropping off my pear trees, so some stresses that's probably been happening, these hotter temperatures. But it's August. We're getting towards the end of August. When do you usually pick them?
Probably after the 15th of September,
Mm-hmm.
or they start dropping anyhow. But, I haven't heard any dropped. I just know that there was a lot of laying on the ground. There was a lot out there where Beth lived there in that field there along the edge. There was a lot of walnuts on the ground too.
Mm-hmm.
These are the little walnuts that don't, they say like they have or something, they don't mature. So they're no good for nuts. For the nut inside. So.
Well, then you don't want them anymore. Well, that tends to be, there's pests that can contribute to that too. In the fruit or feeding around the fruit. Christina, do you know? Google it.
I don't know anything about walnuts.
Just Google why do walnut trees drop fruit early?
I've been picking them up last several years and taking them down. That guy on Old Michigan Road south of State Road 110.
Mm-hmm.
But I just didn't think it was already time to start picking them up because I'm not ready.
So, our state tree is a top carbon store in one New York City study. Works hard under rough conditions. So that's good news. The silver maple could drop nearly 25,000 pounds in a 55-year period due to its fast growth. So as long as it's out in the woods and not by your house, it's a good tree. Oaks have adapted to thrive in many climates, provide shelter, and is a stable tree to be in an urban or forest environment. Horse chestnuts grow well in cities. It's one of the top producers of exceptional shade, which offers passive cooling benefits, of course. Our native mulberry produces the added benefit of a delicious seasonal fruit, and it tends to be over a longer period than some fruit-producing trees, so it's something to enjoy earlier in the season than apples and pears and peaches.
You get the seed caught in your cheese.
I like them. I snack on them, but what I have is white mulberry, the invasive one, which I should cut down.
It does say for walnuts, poorly pollinated may start to produce fruit and then drop it if it was poorly pollinated. So it's possible it's something from early in the spring.
And if it's the smaller fruits, that kind of makes sense because blueberries fully pollinated the small ones. Good pollinated blueberries tend to be the larger ones.
And then the other big one is excessive rains, weather, wind, injury, they'll drop. So we've had some of that. Sure.
We sure have.
It's a bust year, well, it's because of early frost or freezing. Or lake freeze or something. Like we have lake freeze.
No, but we've we've had a weird year. We had dry stress early, wet stress in between, depends on where the trees are located in the topography. I had someone that has a really nice tree by his house, but when they built the house, they took away all the root zone for that tree to grow in. So the tree is stressed out now, and it's a multi-trunk tree, which concerns me. But where the roots grow now is a wet area, so I know that tree suffers in seasonal high waters because the roots are in saturated soils for extended periods of time. So I don't know if that tree's going to make it or not. He just got happy there wasn't a disease.
What's a London pine?
Good question. What
I
is it?
haven't, I also never heard of it, but it's more of an urban. It's one that they can tolerate pollution, root cramping, so I don't know if it, bigger cities would be a better place for it, but I've never heard of London pine.
It's not really a native, is it? Not a native tree. Is it?
Google it. What's London pine? Picture. We want a picture. I can't Google that.
Yellow tulip, they don't have very deep roots, do they? I know
Well,
there's
most trees aren't really deep rooted. Most of the roots are in the upper foot. So your soil structure will determine how easy it is for a tree to blow over, because if you have a sandy soil that tends to be grouty on top, you do go deeper, but that soil doesn't have good structure. So I've seen trees in wet conditions blown over on our sandy soils, but where if you have better soil structure, more holding capacity of the soil, it's less likely to happen. But 70% of tree roots tend to be in that upper foot, so that's deep, and then 90% is the upper 2 foot. So most trees, and that's why we never want to mess around with tree roots, because they grow at the oxygen level they need. So they find the level that they meet their moisture and oxygen needs the best. That's
A London plane, it's in the Planatus family. It is native to zone 5 to 9. Fast growing red-brown scales flake off of a cream colored bark. So it's actually, the bark is very, very nice. Distinctive leaves with lighter undersides, fast growing, resistant to anthracnose.
anthracnose.
Yeah, moist, well-drained soils, full sun. To light shade, grow 75 feet to 100 feet, 8-foot spread. They can get pretty massive. But they will do
Tolerate.
well in
No.
don't die.
Bonsai, we grow every kind of tree, bonsai, and what keeps them small is the root restriction. So how well a tree can tolerate root restriction can determine how well it can handle the urban environment. Because you take a tall tree and lay it down, it should have roots out that far, because it should have a similar mass of root system as it does above the ground. But some trees struggle with having their roots inhibited by roads and urban environments that exist. I'm surprised trees do so well between the sidewalk and the road.
Well, Bob, I'll tell you, if the city asks you what they should plant, this is probably a good one. Because the Arbor Day Foundation even supports that it's resistant or tolerates pollution, transplants very easily, has really, like I said, really nice bark. It makes some red flowers in April. It's got a nice little fruit.
Well, we'll have to check that one out.
I've never heard of it.
I've never either, but it's very nice.
I don't think it's in that 50, that little booklet, 50 Trees of Indiana. That
I wonder.
they have for acres of forest.
Probably isn't, because that'd be the 50th most common tree. Maybe this one
I had that book somewhere, but I wish I had it again.
Well, I've got one in my office. I can copy it off for you. I don't think I'm gonna-
That was 50 cents.
Can you still buy it?
I don't know, but that's what you have to order.
So sweet gum is has good fall color, long lived, considered American linden instead. In the north, consider American linden instead. So it's the fruit dropping from the tree that creates issues with sweet gum, unless you're an artist. I had a master gardener that used them for art.
Oh,
with her classes, so she likes it now. Carol Nelson didn't because she didn't like them in her garden. Dogwood, we know about our dogwoods, seasonal flowers, particularly a dense tree like black walnut can store more carbon in a smaller tree, but as an understory tree. So we don't want to put that one out in direct sun unless we're willing to live with the damage that can occur. Ah! Can't plant it.
Small home gardens.
Nope, can't plant it.
It's not toxic, but the walnut is.
No, we got the needle cast disease they all tend to get unless it's
Oh, the
resistant
blue
to
spruce you're talking about?
blue spruce. So it's good in the Pacific Northwest. Douglas fir also excels. The issue with both of these is the cultivar, according to my arborist extension educator, there is a better cultivar, but the ones they tend to sell in our zone in this area is the cultivar that tends to have issues. Douglas fir has got a needle cast disease. Of course, blue spruce does. So I would select only plant those if my neighbors don't have them. So if you have remember, disease is dependent upon susceptibility of host, weather, and presence of the disease. So if we don't have any blue spruce around you, you can try one and enjoy it for the first 10 years. And probably by then, someone will plant one beside you. So white, red, ponderosa, Hispaniola are the most carbon effective conifers. White pine's the best out of that group. Red pine can have the use of blossom, Diplodia tip blight. So we have diseases that can impact those two. So white pine would be the best. Our issue when selecting trees is that disease resistance. We got several trees in both of these categories that can have disease problems. So enjoy them while you have them, but we have a lot of red pines that are in decline in Marshall County due to an insect that's feeding on the tips of them and also the fungal disease. But they're old. Some of them are very old. So black-eyed Susan, why plant daisies when you can have a more beautiful black-eyed Susan? That's a good question. Native to about all of North America, will grow in just about any type of soil and any light, but complete shade. Milkweed, we're taking care of our butterflies. Which butterfly? Right. There you go. Audience participation. So there's a lot of cultivars and milkweeds, not just the one that we had at the fairgrounds before that got cleaned up for us. And important habitat for monarch butterflies. Gladiaoria, if you're looking for a super dramatic flower, it has one for you. It's native throughout most of Canada and North America.
That's not. One I have, I don't think it's not a perennial.
Well, the blanket flower is an example of a annual that acts like a perennial because it reproduces so highly. It's an example of one that, a type of flower that's native. Got any comments, Christina?
No, I was actually looking that one up because I've never seen that, but that's a cool looking flower.
Good, how are you?
Yeah,
It's like a straw flower, isn't it?
it looks kind of like a cross between a coneflower and the black-eyed Susans. They have beautiful red centers, a yellow on the outside. This variety, at least, some of them come in all red, but it stays pretty low to the ground, but it mounds. I mean,
That's what I got. I got two.
these are pretty gorgeous.
I got two. They're now just looking good because I sort of planted them late. But they're not, they're an annual though. They don't.
So I was trying to look up, seeing if there's varieties that might be perennial. Or maybe they just
Well,
receive
they
very.
recede readily, so not only do they recede for you for next year, but you have gifts to give usually.
Yeah, they go to, down to zone 2 or zone 3, 3 to 10. They have a pretty wide range of zones that they grow well in.
So our clovers will add nitrogen, help build our soils. They're not going to be taxing our soils because they're fixing nitrogen just like soybeans do. Provides blooms for bees, as do other flowers we're talking about. Clover is also a super soft. Some varieties are native to North America, and there's many different cultivars of clover. Red fescue, cool season, shade tolerant. That's why they're good in grass mixes. It's not as soft as turf grass, but little ones run rampant all over. So it's a good one for the shade and drought tolerance. It's the range of red fescue. Sedges grow in wet areas. We have different cultivars of sedges. Southern Indiana, they're even called watergrass because it's what grew in the wet areas of their pastures and fields would be sedges. Some cultivars can be a little bit invasive. You don't want a lot of them, but it's low maintenance. Looks similar to grasses. And if you let an area be taken over by sedges, they take very little maintenance. Creeping thyme, native to Europe and North Africa. Creeping thyme grows in most conditions. Doesn't require mowing. Handles high levels of foot traffic, but it smells amazingly underfoot. Thyme. So we have different cultivars, different things we can grow that will be productive. So native grasses and flowers, and even some non-natives that will work in our environments. Looking at shrubs, again, we got dogwood shrubs, which are neat because we can have different color of woods, and that we can be harvesting, use in indoor arrangements if we like, or the florist industry can utilize as well. So they're low maintenance, and something else that can be in your garden where all the water pools, so it can take some wetter conditions. Chokecherry, as long as you don't have livestock, it's a good plant. The damaged branches, the leaves can produce cyanide. So it wouldn't be something you'd want to fall down and have something eating after it starts to wilt. But other than that, it's a good, I got choke type cherry trees on my property. They do well and they're attractive, have nice bark. Prefer wooded understories and edges of woods. Well, it's kind of my property, so that's why they do well there. Junipers, hardy, super drought tolerant, super versatile shrub. Junipers is for you. There you go. Junipers can grow almost anywhere in North America. We have to remember that when we're managing them, we don't want to prune beyond the green because, like other evergreens, the branch will die if you get too aggressive in the pruning. And as our climate changes, bagworms love them. So you want to be watching out for that little single bag hanging on your juniper this year because next year it could be 300 of them. This is the best picture ever. Thank you, Christine. Because this is really showing you how we can build organic matter down deep in our soils by using cover crops. It's the root growth of different forbs and grasses that have a better root system for going deep into the soil. I won't go through the detail of the different, like this is Indian grass, that's a native grass to the prairies here in the United States. Then we got forbs as well. So you can see how the forbs can produce a thicker root system going deep, but the fine roots of our grasses go very deep as well. You can see the depth here compared to bluegrass. So mainly this is bluegrass. So that's maybe why my soil is not as well developed, because it has those smaller root systems. But even bluegrass, if you take care of it right, the roots get deeper than it will if you mow it too close to the ground. But that's how cover crops and native plants build depth of soil. And that's why the prairie created such a deep A layer of soil that was high in organic matter, because every year, most of these roots were dying back, leaving behind organic matter to develop the soil organic matter as it decomposed. And then the next year's root system had all those channels created by these roots next year to go that deep or possibly even deeper as the channels are developed on soils that have not had this type of plants growing on them. So this is how we can create really high quality soils by using cover crops or perennial plantings like our SWCD has done here in some of these zones. We'll create deeper soils. That's going to have increased carbon storage. So what is a gigaton? It's a huge amount.
It's a huge amount.
300 gigatons of carbon. Temperate grasslands can store up to. So we can help sequester some carbon by utilizing some areas that we revert back to areas that are just native forbs and grasses growing over time. So a grassland stores up to 30% of the world's organic matter and cover 30% of North America. But our grasslands we're losing some of them, just at doing how we manage them. Like a Great Plains that has a prairie chicken is becoming endangered because we've lost 2/3 of the Great Plains where it was its native habitat, because we have scrub growth of trees that are replacing the dynamic plant life of a grassland. So the perennial vegetation, though the roots die back every year, regrows and keeps repopulating that soil with roots that will provide organic matter over time and build the soil health. The difference between a woodlands and a grasslands is most of their stored carbon in woodland trees is going to be in the form of roots that aren't dying back near as much. The trunk and limbs and the leaves that fall on the soil surface break down rapidly, so we don't get a deep organic matter layer build up in our soil. Where the grasslands are having that die back of the root system every year, creating that better depth of soil with carbon in it and high organic matter. Our prairies, native prairies, have remained productive for centuries. That created those high quality soils before we converted them to another land use, mainly growing crops. You want to explain this?
Yes, so there are several different websites, but I found this one. I was like, well, how much carbon am I as a person, a normal human being, putting into the world? Well, they have several places that will kind of tell you what your carbon footprint is. For you to exist, how much carbon are you putting out there into the world? What's really nice about this website, it kind of goes through and asks you about your calories, how much you eat, how much you travel, if you have to go by plane, train, car. I only took a little clip here, but then it goes down to your gas and electric. How much do you spend on average per month? The size of your household, and I think it can give you more options than that. But at the end of this little, calculator, how many trees does it take for you to offset your footprint? Which I thought was kind of nice. So for me, I put a household of 3 because I pretty much have 3 of us in our household. For me to offset my carbon, I need about 460 trees.
You need more property.
I need more property. What was funny is at the end of this, for this one, it says which costs about $50 if you donate to our organization to plant a tree or trees for $50.
Ah.
So for them, it's a way of,
So they have a calculator based on the number of trees you need and $50. You
Yeah.
can send us a check for
We'll plant
$4,000,
trees
$20,000, and we'll take care of your guilt.
will take care of your guilt. So I think it's very interesting to know, especially with the earlier slide, Bob, that had Indiana has about 340 trees per citizen.
Yeah,
So we almost
balance out.
can balance out with a little bit. So, I mean,
Because you have
I
3
try to
citizens in your household, so three times 340.
now my little ones have less calories. They don't drive because I already drive them. So their footprint's a bit smaller than mine.
Uh-huh.
So as a household, we'll probably be, I would say, 800 trees for all 3 of us because they don't use as much. Now, as they grow, one household will become 3. So, that will multiply later on. But this was a really great website. Again, there's different ones, but knowing your carbon footprint, I think is pretty nice, especially since Indiana's almost there. We're almost there. We can bump it up a little bit.
So what we need to do is maybe a few more natural areas reforested and encourage people to have a few trees in their landscapes.
Or choose native. I mean,
Or
there's
choose
other options. So I do
native
try to
prairie.
put natives in my, I don't have a big yard, but I do have native flowers that grow there. I try to do my own composting so I can try to not buy as much soil. It's really nice that I only have to drive right here to town. So driving a lot less, a lot of this carbon footprint is your mileage per week of just travel.
So what we all need to do is retire, then we don't have to drive.
Retire
Marion, do
and
you
then
do
stay
more
wherever
driving
you're
now
retired.
than when you were retired or? Well, working from home could have a change then, because that's the
Yes,
one
it could
thing,
bring down that
transition that
carbon
we have
footprint.
had through COVID-19 that will probably go forward is that people are going to spend less time in their office, balanced with some homework. So that's going to help reduce the commute time for people driving to work, reducing their footprint while reducing yours by not spending every day at work.
Yep. And
So-
some companies found that they're saving so much money not having to heat and cool the building.
Well, the federal government's considering that too, in their workplaces, because it's, when you look at these urban centers like Washington DC, it's just a nightmare to commute. So if we can reduce that, it's gonna be better for everybody. I mean, on their highways going to DC, there's a lane that you can pay money to get to use. So that you may get there a little faster.
Sounds like the toll road to me, Bob.
It's a toll road inside of the public road.
Inside of the public road.
That toll road's not cheap.
No, it is not.